from New Jersey. I'm apologies here as I'm having to re-record once again. I've had several technology issues yesterday, and I realized that after finally uploading my video, for some reason the sound is not really coming through and I can't seem to recover it no matter what I do. So I'm hoping to re-record and this time it to actually be successful so that you can hear me. That being said, my name is Gina Miller. I'm from Wrightstown, New Jersey, and I am a UGST alumni from the MACM program. I have chosen to do a 6-week lesson plan from the book of Ephesians, the books of Ephesians and Colossians. And I could also say greetings, my fellow Pauline fan or fanatics. I'm not quite sure which category you'd fall under. I think I possibly might fall under the category of fanatic, to quote our dear Dr. Brickle, since I'm taking this class for fun and also usage in my local assembly. So that being said, a couple things that I like to address right off the bat is the audience that I'm creating the 6-week lesson plan for. The objective, or the overarching objective, I'll present today of the reason why I've created started to create the 6-week lesson plan, and then the different themes underneath that I have found through my research on Ephesians and Colossians. The way that I plan on grabbing the attention of my audience, and I've already implemented this past Sunday and doing a trial run of some of my findings already. And then the general layout of my lesson plan, and then finally the closing of the actual lessons and what I plan to do for that. And then finally I'll give you a sampling of, again, a truncated, I should say, version of the Adult Sunday School lesson that I presented this past Sunday on my findings on Ephesians and Colossians, and I narrowed it down to Colossians for this past Sunday, and even more for this presentation, since I do have a 15-minute window and I don't want to go too far beyond that. Otherwise, I certainly won't be able to upload anything. That being said, the audience that I'm creating this specific 6-week lesson plan for is within our Adult Sunday School class. And really it's a wonderful class because it's such a mixture of people from different walks of life. Whether we have young marrieds, we have singles, we have marrieds with children, we have people that are brand new to the church, those that are well seasoned and have been part of the church for a really long time, different cultural backgrounds. So it really makes for a nice mixture and creates a lot of good interaction and conversation on a Sunday morning. My overarching objective really is practical application of life in Christ through the topics found in Ephesians and Colossians that further shape our identity as believers. The presentation, the themes that I am going to, hoping to be covering is the preeminence of Christ and what that means exactly for the life of the believer. The all-sufficiency of Christ, meaning that there's no need for supplemental man-made traditions for salvific purposes. Walking in the newness of life that is provided in Christ. So essentially also the identity of the believer in Christ, exemplifying Christ-like love in all manner of life, no matter where you find yourself, and specifically we see that in Ephesians and Colossians the household is addressed, but no matter what role you have within that household, you are to exhibit Christ-like love. And then finally, living life in such a way that entices others to come to life in Christ. So the Missio Dei, according to Gorman, if you will. And then the way that I plan on grabbing the attention of my audience, and that I usually do and have also done this past Sunday, is I would like to start with a story. Again, a series or a lesson that it's isolated that I will teach. Usually I like to go through it in my devotion time. It's something that's personal to me, so then I'm able to share a story, something personal about it, to draw in my audience. I also like to start off with a very simple PowerPoint image in the background that grabs the attention of my audience, whether it be something humorous or something emotionally grabbing, It's usually just very simple and either text, like you see something simple that I have right now on the screen, or an image. Then I like to open up the floor for conversation and get the buy-in of my audience to see what their opinion is on the books that we're going to be presenting, or the lesson, or the topic, whatever have you. And I don't want to get too far into the different things that I do as far as handouts, because that's going to be my next session here. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So the layout, the lesson layout, or the plan. I do provide a PowerPoint for each and every single lesson that I present. And again, my PowerPoints, I like to keep them with just images that are attention grabbing, and or just texts that are very simple, that just embody the specific topic that I'm going to be covering, or what I'm talking about as I go through the lesson. So right now, for example, I have an image here of a checklist, something to just exemplify what an image maybe would look like of a layout or a lesson plan. So I just use images that kind of go along with my lesson. As I'm speaking through, I'll go through the images in my PowerPoint and or the simplified text. Again, this is just taking into consideration my audience. I personally do like PowerPoints that have more text on them, because I like to take notes off of those PowerPoint slides that have maybe more, that are more heavily laden maybe with text. But on a Sunday morning at 11 a.m. before, my audience also has another hour to go through for service, I want to make sure I keep it light and a little bit more attention grabbing with visuals in that sense. I will also do a handout with key points usually and scriptural references, depending on who I have in the class, and depending on the topic. Also, I will, depending on if there's time, I know I'm saying that a lot, depending on, but if there is time at the end of the class, I like to hand out just either 1 or 2 questions for reflection that those that are within the adult Sunday school class can either pair up and work on that, or they can take it home if we've not had enough time for them to reflect on it throughout the week and bring it back, and we can have some conversation around it in the first few minutes of the beginning of the next adult Sunday school class. One thing that's really great about Gorman, I love textbooks like this that actually provide questions for reflection at the end of each chapter. Not only is that great as a student, right, because it kind of reiterates what you've just read and helps you think through that and apply it, but also you can take that as a springboard and kind of adapt it to what your needs are for your adult Sunday school class, as I'm doing. Of course, give credit where credit's due, but you can then take it and tailor it and kind of change it up for your class as well. And then, of course, my closing, I like to end it with my take-home, or kind of reiterating that objective that I want to get through for the lesson. So again, an attention-grabbing image, something that will kind of stay with my audience for them to think about throughout the week. Either a handout about the reflection that includes reflection questions on it, if they've not gotten to fill it out already within class. So those are just some things that I've done, and of course the more and more I do this, the more I grow, the more ideas I have. And the more books I'm allowed to purchase, it's never ending, who knows. But that being said, again, I'd like to present you with just a sampling of the lesson that I presented this past Sunday within my adult Sunday school class. So Colossians. And I presented that it is radically Christ-centered. Now, of course, you could say both about Colossians and Ephesians. They're both radically Christ-centered. And to quote N.T. Wright, and quote, it is considered the Christology of Paul, unquote. Now, of course, this depends on what your view is on authorship. The authorship of both Ephesians and Colossians, and I know that we're focusing right now on Colossians, have been called into question. Oftentimes, some scholars have believed that these were written by followers of Paul or his disciples after his death due to certain literary nuances or differences from his undisputed letters. But both, or I should say all three authors or references that I've used with Longnecker and Still, N.T. Wright and Gorman, agree that Paul probably was the author. and that these differences that certain scholars have found are often exaggerated. For example, the nuances in style and theological references could have been simply due to the fact that it is probable that Paul dictated this letter to Tychicus, who is the person that is referenced in chapter 4, verses 7 through 9, that actually was the one who took the letter to the church in Colossae and presented it to them. So this is could be considered one of Paul's, again, prison letters. So some of the nuances and the stylistic differences could be simply because he gave direction to Tychicus, if that was the situation, and he penned the letter for Paul. Now, of course, there's no way of having absolutes here unless, I was able to travel back in time and see exactly what went on. But nonetheless, that doesn't, not being able to have an absolute on the authorship does not negate its value within the New Testament. And certainly, I would say that it would have more for it undergirding and further confirming that it's Paul writing the letter, since there's more that agrees with Paul as you dig in to the letters, both Ephesians and Colossians, than would disagree as far as his authorship is concerned. So mainly just slight differences or variations, deviances in the literary style that we see. But if you will, with me, as this setting that we have within Colossians, Paul specifically is writing to the church in Colossae and reminding them some things, and also at the same time combating certain erroneous philosophies that are trying to infiltrate the church. So the one thing that I like to present, and it resonates here with what Paul is trying to remind as well, the church in Colossians, is that if we think for a moment about the human fingerprint, it's very detailed, it's very unique. I know within my life that I've worked within the medical field, and we have certainly used fingerprinting for our employees, as well as sometimes certain people that come in that we have to care for, but they might have been involved in something that's been a little bit nefarious. So in a way to identify them if we don't have access maybe to certain DNA, and we're able then to identify them specifically because of their fingerprint is very unique to them. Much like the fingerprint is very unique to us in our physical being here, our identity as believers is very uniquely placed within the work of the cross, the work that Christ did on the cross. And Paul was writing to the believers here in Colossians, kind of reminding them that, your salvation, your identity as a believer is found in Christ and the work that he did in his death and his resurrection. Nothing outside of that. Now, the setting that we find in Colossians is very similar to, and I would say, that what we experience today within our society. America is often referenced as the melting pot because there's so many different there's so many differing philosophies, religious opinions, and that's exactly what Paul also was combating when he wrote this to the church of Colossians. Now, the church within Colossians wasn't established by Paul. It was thought to be established by Epaphras, his disciple, but possibly Epaphras or Paul was made known of the issue that was going on in Colossians, and so he wrote this letter to kind of bring them back and ground them in Christ, and making sure that outside philosophies weren't trying to infiltrate and distract them from the truth of the gospel. So the problem in this specific area of Colossae is that it was what we would consider today, again, bringing in maybe distracting philosophies. Both the church within Colossians was made up of both Jews and Gentiles. So of course you have the Gentiles bringing in their philosophies and their traditions, and as well as the Jewish people bringing in their traditions and adherence to the law, perhaps as well. So, and according to Gorman, quote, the possibility of religious syncretism was perhaps even stronger here than anywhere else in Paul's polytheistic world, unquote. Meaning, already we see in the New Testament as we read, there was a lot of times that Paul was combating, the concept of polytheism and different philosophies. But Gorman is saying this was seemingly even more prevalent within the area where the church of Colossians was, or should I say, resided within. But Paul does not shrink back from addressing this. In fact, in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8, he says, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of the world rather than on Christ." So he doesn't mince any words, he doesn't waste any time, and he is stating here that anything that's outside of Christ is hollow and deceptive philosophy. And of course, in a way, these philosophies, whether it be following human traditions, for example, Jewish traditions maybe of circumcision as a way of supplementing your for salvation, or the worship of angels, or the necessity saying you must see visions and dreams. All these things really are saying that Christ is insufficient. How crazy is that? That might sound crazy, but if I were to reflect and think about how many times I, without realizing it, sometimes rely upon my works to make me feel better as a Christian. Yes, prayer is necessary, it's communication with God, reading the Word is necessary, fasting, all those things that we do, but those things that we do are out of our relationship with Christ. It's faith being exhibited in our works. But again, it still is not what should be the basis of my identity. Neither should it be the basis of my salvation. And that's such a relief that I don't have to base my salvation upon my works, because I fall short of anything that would be really praiseworthy on a daily basis. And I would not want my works to be the basis of my salvation, because I would say right now that I would not make it into heaven if it was based upon my salvation. And I'm thankful that my identity is also not found in my works, because there are days, again, where I would not want to be identified necessarily with the situations of life and my works. And it also, when works come into play, or human traditions, sometimes, pride can get in the way, and looking at others and comparing yourself amongst each other. But I'm so thankful that the heart of the letter of Colossians is about the reality of the believer, quote, the reality of the believer being in Christ, unquote, as well as Christ being in them. So this fact, according to Gorman, further strengthens Pauline authorship, since it really does follow the undisputed letters, like Romans, for example. So I'm thankful that my identity is formed and founded in Christ, and not in traditions, not in philosophies or thought processes that are man-made. And anytime I begin to get frustrated, maybe in my walk, or feeling like or feeling insecure, or feeling as though that, I'm not living up to par, take a step back and see, maybe am I basing my worth as a believer, or my identity as a believer, or the foundation of my salvation on my works or human traditions, versus the identity that I have that's in Christ, and the work of that He did on the cross, and in His death and His resurrection. So this concept of empty versus full, fullness being experienced in Christ only, and everything outside of Christ is emptiness being experienced through these false teachings and philosophies. Those are all empty. But fullness is experienced by being in Christ, this concept of being in Christ that Paul brings to the forefront here is one of the themes that we find in in Colossians that I'm presenting, as well as Ephesians, that we'll see in the following lessons that I will be doing as well in the upcoming weeks. And finally, the thought that I would want to leave you with here is the cross is what brought the victory through Christ, not the law. And I'm so thankful for that. Quote again from Gorman. There's so many things from all of these wonderful authors that I've just really caught my attention and really appreciative of the work that they've done. Is and quote, it says here from Gorman, a community that forgets the cross forgets its identity, unquote. And that's so true. If we as believers forget the cross, then we've lost everything. The work of God reconciling the world back unto him through Christ is the basis of where I place my faith. And it is part of that restoring of our identity of what we originally were created to be, and that was lost, of course, through sin and the fall of man. And then finally, I'll end on a final quote here as well that I really enjoy is, quote, those who set their minds on Christ in heaven, in whom their ultimate identity and future lie, are presently propelled into the real world, unquote. And again, I love this. It just further bolsters that prior quote and really the entirety of this this lesson and the objective of coming back to the cross, making sure that our identity is found in Christ and Him and His work that He did on the cross, not in ourselves, not in human and man-made traditions, but setting our minds on Christ in heaven and knowing that that is where ultimately our identity lies and our future is. And that is our reality as Christians, as believers. And I'm so thankful for that. So I know that there is many more things that we could talk about within Ephesians and Colossians, but that's just a sampling and a general layout of my lesson plan and some of my preliminary findings. Of course, time does not allow me to share with you my pages and pages and pages of notes and thoughts that I've put down in preparing for all of this. But thank you so much for taking this journey with me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And God bless. And hopefully it works this time.